A life that continued quietly. There are lives that don't collapse when something breaks. They simply keep going, changed forever, but still moving forward. This is one of those lives. Margaret met Thomas when she was 23. They weren't passionate, dramatic lovers. They were practical, kind, certain. They built a marriage the way people used to, slowly, carefully, believing that effort mattered more than feelings. They raised 2 children, bought a house they could barely afford, learned to live with each other's habits instead of trying to change them. Margaret believed that was love. As the years passed, life became full in quiet ways. Work, family dinners, grandchildren, familiar routines that gave structure to their days. What slowly disappeared was not affection, it was attention. Thomas stopped asking how she felt. Margaret stopped expecting him to. They still spoke every day. They still shared a bed, but their conversations became informational, not personal. Neither of them complained. They told themselves this was normal, that long marriages were meant to feel this way. Thomas retired before Margaret did. Suddenly, his days felt longer than he knew how to fill. He joined a local volunteer group, nothing serious, just a way to leave the house. That's where he met Susan. Susan was recently widowed. She spoke openly, without hesitation. She asked questions and waited for real answers. She noticed Thomas, not as a husband, not as a grandfather, but as a man with a history and thoughts that still mattered. At first, their connection felt harmless. Coffee after meetings, long conversations about books, memories, regrets. Thomas didn't hide it. He simply didn't mention it. He told himself it wasn't an affair. There was no touching, no declarations, just companionship. But companionship can become intimacy long before anyone admits it. Margaret noticed the shift slowly. Thomas seemed lighter, not happier, but more awake. He smiled at messages on his phone. He was distracted in ways he hadn't been in years. Margaret didn't suspect another woman. She suspected distance. She asked herself what she had done wrong, then told herself she was being dramatic. The truth revealed itself one afternoon, not through evidence, but honesty. Thomas sat down across from her at the kitchen table and said, "I need to tell you something." Margaret listened without interruption. He spoke calmly, carefully. He explained Susan. He explained loneliness. He explained how it happened without intention. Margaret didn't cry. She felt something colder, recognition. She realized that the marriage she thought she was protecting had already changed long before Susan existed. "What do you want?" she asked. Thomas didn't answer immediately, and that silence told her more than words could. They didn't fight. They didn't rush to decide anything. They lived together for months afterward, differently. Margaret began to see her life with new clarity. She noticed how often she had minimized herself, how rarely she had asked for more. Thomas began to see the weight of his choice, not guilt, responsibility. Susan ended the connection on her own, not out of shame, but respect. The affair ended quietly, but the damage remained. Margaret suggested separation, not because she hated him, but because she needed to know who she was without him. Living alone at 65 felt frightening and freeing. She learned what silence felt like when it belonged only to her. She reconnected with parts of herself she hadn't named in decades. Thomas stayed in the house, alone with memories and the understanding that comfort is not the same as presence. They divorced without bitterness. Years passed. They spoke occasionally, birthdays, holidays, shared updates about the children. Then, one afternoon, they met for coffee. Not as husband and wife, not even as former spouses, as 2 people who had lived a long life together and survived it. They talked honestly for the first time. About fear, about missed moments, about how easy it is to slowly leave a relationship without ever walking out the door. There was no reunion, no regretful romance, only understanding. They hugged before leaving, gently, without longing. Margaret went home knowing she had chosen herself when it mattered. Thomas went home knowing that love doesn't always end with betrayal. Sometimes it ends with neglect. And both of them understood something they hadn't before. A life doesn't fall apart when a marriage ends. Sometimes it finally begins to belong to you.